Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Vila Bianca.
I'm Eric Murphy.
This is Skeptic Generation.
And we need to talk. Hey!
Hi, that was actually a pretty good intro. I liked that one.
Yeah, I've kind of been off the last couple of weeks and we got back on it.
Oh my gosh. It is season 2, episode 35. And it is currently the end of August, which is weird to me. It feels like August just got started.
Yeah, but then the rain came yesterday.
It's been raining and I've been so happy about it. I'm ready for September. I'm ready for fall. Let's be done with Texas summer. There are so many things awful happening right now that the bright, frying pan of doom,
right?
That is Austin right now is just miserable.
And then just seeing just going home every day and seeing every yard is just dead grass because it's just been so hot and so
And then you're judging the people who don't because we're on drought watch and you're like, you guys are using soakers and just completely ignoring the fact that we do not have water right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Feelings. Hi. We have a couple of announcements.
We do.
I know that you wanted to thank Brandon.
I really do. So
give a shout out.
Absolutely. Brandon, if you're watching or most likely listening, Brandon is a podcast listener to the show who messaged us this week and said, hey, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a clicking sound going on and it is really obnoxious. And I know that you guys are audiophiles, and if you didn't know it, just so you know, it's kind of hard, making it hard to listen to. And I was like, really? And so I went through into the waveform of the last podcast, and the waveform looked fine. I didn't see any anything on the low end that was a clicking or the high end. It was right in the middle, in our vocal range. This tick, 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 tick. And it was absolutely invisible to me. When I ran a click filter at that specific range, we went over 20,000 clicks just in the last episode.
Yay.
And so I went in and I fixed it for the podcast and I saw that it's there for the clips, but when you're watching the clips, you don't really notice it so much. But when you're in the car listening to it as a podcast, you do. And so I went through and I changed back to episode, I think 29 or 30. And I'm going to be going back over time and just updating the podcast so that there's not that clicking sound. I don't know how long that's been going on for, but here's the deal. Brandon, I know we reached out to you, but I want to thank you on the air. Our podcast, our clips, and our show overall is getting better because you took the time to reach out. If anybody else wants to reach out, they have suggestions, they see something that we can adjust or that, let us know. Email us at contactskepticgeneration@gmail.com. We do read those emails. We're not able to answer all of them, but we do our best. And if there's a way that we can improve, we want to. So again, Brandon, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple other things. We are going to have an after show today. So if you are able to stick around and come join us on Discord, the link for that is in the description. We just generally kind of shoot the shit, talk about the episode, what you liked, any questions you have about it. We are also going to have a Versus episode in, I believe, 2 weeks. So that's going to be Tuesday, September 13th at 6 p.m. Central. We're going to be talking about the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Yeah, we've been trying our best not to get into it.
We got into an entirely separate one yesterday.
Yeah.
Which was just as interesting, the difference between virtue and value.
Yep, spawning off of eudaimonia. We have really, what is the word that I keep missing?
Esoteric?
Esoteric. We have very esoteric conversations.
We just run ourselves into circles and
we
then and we just we're dead mentally for the rest of the day.
But it's worth it.
It's a lot of fun. So be sure to tune in for that. The hope is that there will be also a call-in line active so you can jump in and be like, hey, I agree with Eric, or hey, I agree with V. And then finally, I did want to shout out, I saw in the live chat that John Klein's had a hard week because his 18-year-old cat died on Monday. And that's really rough. I'm sorry, man. Solidarity there. If you are interested in supporting the show, because Eric will wrest the control of the show away from me if I do not shout the Patreon out, feel free to visit us on Patreon at patreon.com/skepticgeneration. You can also check out tiny.cc/tipsg for any one-time donations you might want to throw our way. And we have our wish list up on Amazon at tiny.cc/sgwishlist, which allows us to show you what we're getting for the studio, what we're planning on building next, and allowing you to help out if that is a more comfortable way to do that for you. We always appreciate everybody who donates and supports us every week. We legitimately could not do this without you. And then finally, if you would like to call in, you can do that. There are multiple ways to do that. You can call using your phone, 585-526-8774. Or you can use the online service that we pay for, so you can call in from anywhere in the world, and that is tiny.cc/callsg. Our call screeners will get you all set up, and then we can kick things off.
Yeah.
I just ran through all of that, so...
You did. That was perfect. That was, yeah, there's...
Coffee has strength and is giving me lots of stamina. We'll see how long that lasts.
Before we dive in, there was something I put it as the title for the show. What is a skeptic?
Yes, co-host, take it away. What is your rant/conversation today?
I don't have too much of a rant, but I do kind of want to address it because people call themselves skeptics, and they may have different ideas of what that means. We've had some callers talk about it, but we don't really address it enough. And here's what skepticism is to me. Skepticism is it's the process of Socratic questioning. It's questioning why you know the things you know. It's interrogating your epistemology and finding out just how well supported your ideas about things are. And the goal of skepticism, the goal of Socratic questioning, isn't to come to solid answers. It's to get to the point where you say, I don't know. And then you can evaluate how well steeped things are. It's funny. It's like 2-year-olds invent Socratic questioning, dialogue, just naturally. Why?
Yeah.
Why? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we do, and it helps. Now, there are some people who will call themselves vaccine skeptics, or round Earth skeptics, or climate change skeptics. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is a misuse of the word, because if you take a look at the process of Socratic questioning, right? Why are you skeptical of this? Mm-hmm. Why, you wind up getting to these weird tangents of, conspiracies of large cover-ups and secret government organizations ruling the world, mm-hmm. and often weird anti-Semitic ideas that are just pervasive in those kinds of, circles.
Right.
But it's really, really wild, and it drives me nuts, because it's such an important thing, and when you mix that in with conspiracy theory, less people are interested in skepticism because they have a different idea of what that means, and mm-hmm. that's not good for anybody.
Yeah, and I think there is a secondary point to be made here. Sorry, we're getting off topic a little bit.
No, this is the topic.
Okay. And this is a great thing to call in about if you have thoughts on the conversation that is currently happening, if you have an idea of what skepticism should mean or should not mean.
Or if you are one of the skeptics that I listed, if you are a climate change skeptic.
If you think that John F. Kennedy was going to rise from the dead and endorse Trump for 2020, then call in.
And let us know why, and let us know where we're wrong. Go ahead, Ameet.
Yeah, so I do want to not validate, because that is not the correct takeaway. I'm not validating anybody's conspiracies.
Okay.
However, a very big part of this, Eric, what you said is, the goal is not to come to a conclusion that you are 100% about necessarily. If you reach that, that's cool. But that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be exploring why you feel the way you feel, why you think the way you think.
Well, and even more so than that, even Socrates said, at the end of it is aporia. It's this loss of like, holy crap, there's nothing, it doesn't go any further.
Yeah. So what I want to just shout out as well is a lot of the conspiracies that circulate, especially in groups that are not in power. So a good example is a lot of the pseudoscience around herbalism or crystal healing or anything like that, which is very popular in like mom groups on Facebook. There is reason to be skeptical as a woman or as somebody who, you know, is AFAB of the medical industry. Like, there is legitimate criticism to make that, you know, that group is not taken seriously as much. They need to frequently bring male advocates with them to make sure that they are heard. They're conditions that are unique to people with, you know, the point I'm trying to make here is we are not saying that there is no reason to be skeptical of these things, right? If you look at somebody who is trying everything they can, throwing every single herb and crystal at a condition, yes, say, hey, that's not helping you, that's hurting you, especially if you're doing that in place of actual help. But also ask, hey, why are you doing it in this way? What help are you not getting?
Well,
because there are reasons that people gravitate towards conspiracy, even though they misdiagnose what that reason is, you know?
Entirely agreed. And I think that, again, that is skepticism, right? Like, if you look at the scientific method, if done properly, has skepticism baked in. How do you know what you know? Let's test it. Let's find out over and over again to see if that really is the effect of it. I would say that understanding why some people would, like, also skepticism is not, you know, trusting the establishment either.
Right.
Because again, Socratic dialogues are that thing.
Right.
What I would say though is there is a baked in prejudice. There's a baked in sexism and baked in racism that exists, at least I can say for sure, here in the United States. And I'm sure that's the case everywhere else as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you're not getting medical care because somebody thinks that your ability to feel pain is less, or you're just more sensitive, then yeah, absolutely, I understand that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't break down skepticism. What it does is it
No, by no
applies-
means.
Yeah, what it does is it makes sure that we have a critical eye towards those people who are gatekeepers between us and our well-being. And when you are in a medical profession, I would consider you a gatekeeper there, making sure that you are, you know, helping people is incredibly important. But yeah, those I agree.
My point was less, you know, combating the idea of skepticism in the way that you presented it, and more just a plea to the people online who consider themselves skeptics, who go after conspiracy theorists with unhelpful critique and mockery, as opposed to, hey, there is a reason that you are feeling this way. It's definitely not the reason you think. There are no lizard people. However, if you are feeling like you are being taken advantage of and the system is rigged against you, that's because it is. Let's look at the actual reasons for that. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There doesn't need to be a secret cabal of Illuminati
Exactly.
for your doctor not to take you seriously.
Beautifully put.
Yeah. All right. We got a couple of callers.
Okay.
What do you want to do? Who do you want to talk to?
Let's chat with Mark in California. Mark called in about skepticism and asks about understanding the burden of proof and logical precepts. I'm super curious about what this is. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I've called before. I'm the Ethiopian guy.
Yeah, hi, welcome.
Yeah. Hi, nice to talk with you again. I think when we talk about skepticism, and one of the reasons that people can misuse the term in talking about things like climate change skepticism and vaccine skepticism, that sort of thing, is that they don't have an understanding of fundamental logical precepts that are necessary in order to truly be skeptical. And one of the biggest of those is the burden of proof. The idea that we don't adopt an idea until it has met some kind of an evidentiary burden,
Right.
and we understand what good evidence is versus lousy evidence. Those are pieces that unfortunately are not taught very well in this country. And so people will, they'll jump into a topic where they adopt a position, they cherry pick information in order to back it up, and then they believe that they are being skeptical. And that ain't it.
Exactly. I think burden of proof is a great example of that. Also, the null hypothesis is something you touched on as well. This idea that you don't get to say a thing and then disprove that thing in order to make it false. The proper way to go about something is to not have a decision on a thing until it has been sufficiently proven. And it's very interesting to me that we are so bad at teaching these things to people here, just because it's helpful to have a society that doesn't know these things, right? It's helpful for religions who want to stay in power. It's helpful for governments. It's helpful for, being able to utilize people by giving them reasons for things and hoping they don't ask additional questions. Yep. So it makes a lot of sense that this isn't actually widely taught. There should be classes on this in high school, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, yeah.
I'm very sorry. I thought I'd muted, but I didn't.
No, you're good. Yeah, so, we agree there, Mark. Is there anything else here?
There's one other piece, which is Occam's razor. The idea that a simple proposition that is, less baroque for a phenomenon is the more likely to be an accurate description is one that conspiracy theorists routinely disregard.
They disregard it, but, and I will push back here a little bit, Mark, there is a secondary piece to Occam's razor that I think a lot of people, even, skeptics, do miss, which is in the absence of actual evidence, Occam's razor should apply. But a lot of people take the idea that, the simple answer just is the best one, even if we have proof that a more complex thing is at play. So yes, Occam's razor is also super important here, and it is routinely misused. But there are complicated things that happen for complex reasons. It's just in the absence of any understanding of a thing, the best thing to do is limit the number of assumptions you're making about it.
Right. Yeah, the sun doesn't actually rise. The earth turns.
Exactly.
It looks like the sun rises, and that would be the simplest explanation, but that's not actually what's going on.
Beautiful analogy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think I love that we got that little primer of like a couple of the things we're talking about, the concrete precepts there. That's awesome. Thank you so much for calling in, Mark.
Thank you.
Sure, you're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was a good start. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we lean on things like, this person's a skeptic, and if we just don't evaluate it, then we're running into trouble. And honestly, I just saw people doing a really bad job of being skeptics on Facebook, and it pissed me off. So I've got a platform, and that means you're going to hear what's going on. All right, who are we talking to next?
Let's see. I like Ray in the UK. Is there a problem with the phrase extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? Ray, welcome to the show.
Ooh.
Hi.
Hello. What is your question/comment?
It's actually quite related to what you just talked about, in the sense that in the same way that Occam's razor is misunderstood and misapplied, often by people who identify with the modern skeptic community as well as other people, I feel like even more so with this particular phrase, I feel like I haven't quite fully worked this out yet, hoping you can kind of help me develop and refine my idea here and see if there's anything wrong with it, because I'm struggling to really explain it for myself, but I feel like I'm onto something where it seems to me that whenever people throughout history have considered themselves skeptics and yet been horribly wrong, it's come down to this, not the phrase, not the exact phrase, they probably weren't consciously thinking it, but the underlying intuitive idea we have, like the underlying intuition that underlies that phrase. I feel like that's actually wrong, or at the very least it's like people haven't analysed what extraordinary means, which means what do you mean by ordinary, And how are you determining when you're looking at a claim if it's ordinary or not? Because throughout history, it seems like people have identified an explanation for something as that can't be true because it's extraordinary, and what they mean is it feels weird to me.
Yeah.
They're just describing a feeling about it.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good analysis of how people have kind of adopted that term. And that's always the danger with adopting just a term. It's as close to cherry picking as atheists get, I think, is just taking random Hitch quotes and being like, this is just something I say now to everything. It does become a thought-stopping device, right? It can, like, oh, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Unless I'm blown away by the quality of your evidence in the moment that you present it to me, I can dismiss this and feel like I'm still a skeptic about it. And that's not how that's supposed to be used.
No.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think extraordinary in this case, or at least how I use it, because I don't know the context in which this quote first came about. Extraordinary just means, hey, if you are going to present me with something that defies what my understanding of the world is and requires me to shift my perspective in some fundamental way about the world, you're going to need to convince me to do that. Right? It's just hey, I'm just not going to adopt the fact that, the earth is flat. Like, that will require me to do a lot of shifting and changing internally. So, yes, absolutely. Even if there are things that are true that fundamentally change the way you view reality, you should still have that requirement that you must be convinced of it. But to me, that's all that means. Like, hey, okay, you're presenting me with something that will change the way I live my life. Mm-hmm. I need solid evidence that this is the case before I change my life.
So it's really about stakes, which is broader than that. You could say stakes that have high, claims that have high stakes, if you're wrong about them, require good evidence before we act upon them. Because, for example, like how doctors made a horrible mistake for decades. They were operating on babies without anesthetic. They just paralyzed them because they misjudged the evidence that said babies feel no pain yet.
Yeah.
And when you look at the history of that, it's frightening. That only stopped happening like the year before I was born. Like, I'm 33. The year before I was born, babies were just being vivisected, and they now know that they died more often because they went into shock. They were being tortured, and they just were tortured to death. And that happened.
Holy crap!
And that's a whole medicine that came from this side, that came from I don't know, just not judging evidence well, and then I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry, I got a bit lost. But
no, that's holy shit.
Yeah, I think you're exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's a good.
They don't want to talk about that because they want you to trust your doctor, even though history kind of suggests look into things yourself. Like go with your doctor. But when there's a really it's a high stakes thing I was talking about.
Yeah,
there were high stakes there. So because the stakes were so high, they should have required proof before they said babies feel no pain.
Right.
It's not that it was extraordinary. There's nothing extraordinary or paradigm changing about whether the nervous system of a baby is developed or not. That wasn't extraordinary or ordinary. It was within the realms of ordinary. But it should have required higher evidence, because what they were going to do, which was, we think anesthetic is dangerous, which it is to a small baby. Therefore, we think it's better to not give them anesthetic. That was a really high stakes claim,
right.
Which should have, and even if it wasn't ordinary, so it's not actually about how extraordinary something is. It's just about how high the stakes are, and that applies to ordinary things.
Ordinary in the term of like natural versus supernatural. And extraordinary does not mean supernatural.
Actually, I kind of want to push back a little bit.
Eric, go for it.
I kind of want to push back a little bit, because when it comes to supernatural, that's really how I interacted with the claim. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I think that it would be better stated, supernatural claims require supernatural evidence.
Oh, you took this in a completely different direction.
I think that comes down to what I'm trying to say is, when you say something supernatural, as far as I can tell, people usually just mean, I can't explain the science behind that idea, therefore it makes me feel weird. It feels spooky. Spooky's the best word for it.
Well,
and so because of that idea, I reject that, because that emotion is not a good way to determine what's actually true in reality, because reality doesn't care if you're
right, but you can still go deeper. You can still go deeper, because it's not just somebody who says I was feeling spooked out. Like, I get that, if somebody got scared, you can go deeper. If somebody says ghosts exist, bring me a ghost. If somebody says a God exists and they can show evidence, bring me the God detector. If somebody says, there's a poltergeist in my house, let's go to your house, show me and tell me how poltergeists are supposed to work. Let me interact with this, and then we can go from there. But if you don't have the evidence of the supernatural, then using the supernatural as a cause for anything is a bridge too far. Once you can get to that point, once you can investigate the supernatural, then we can talk. But until then, it doesn't even get to go on the table of possible explanations, and I think that's what drives me nuts.
I disagree.
Really?
Because I think the problem I have with that is, how do you've made the decision before the point of before you put it on the table that this is in this category you're calling supernatural. But what do you even mean? How have you determined that, for example, if in some way I don't know, say for example with ghosts, I don't particularly believe in ghosts, I've not been convinced of them, but I'm open to them. And the reason I'm open to the idea is because I understand there's science that I don't think we know everything about science. There could be some science we just haven't discovered yet.
Okay, but
and therefore I'm open to that. I'm open to the idea that there is an external cause. It's not in people's imaginations.
But it doesn't.
I don't know what that is.
Well, so here's the thing. You just perfectly exemplified that. We don't know, therefore anything can go on the table, and I think that's absolutely wrong. I think it's absolutely wrong. If somebody broke into your house and stole a cookie from your cookie jar, what we're going to do is we're going to list all of the reasons why that cookie jar, that cookie could be missing from the cookie jar. We can, look for evidence. We could see if there's camera footage. We can dust for fingerprints. We can, check to see if the door was locked. We can list out all of the people. All of those things are really, really good ways to find out what goes on the table, what could be the possible explanation. But if I were to say, oh yes, so we're going to list Ray's neighbors, Ray's family, friends, and the fact that they might sleepwalk, or there's some really clever, raccoon, that's breaking into your house, whatever the case is, if I said, ooh, and also there's life after death, that life sticks around and really likes cookies, is in your house and stole the cookie from the cookie jar, that should go on the table too, along with your neighbors and your friends and your family and all of that stuff. I would say no, that does not get to go on the possible list of things. I would say saying I don't know, if you cut everything out, the solution at the end of it should be I don't know, not, well, we're left with ghosts, so it could be ghosts. No, say I don't know, it needs to be investigated. But when you put ghosts on the table, when you put the supernatural on the table, you're implicitly giving it a lot more credibility than it deserves.
Okay, so can we have another example? Because I feel like it is with that ghost example, but an example I have been using as an analogy is
Sure.
Here's like the thing is, like, again, what makes it supernatural? I haven't really defined what that even means when you say this explanation, because I'm not talking about proof. I'm saying at the point at which something's a mystery, we have not got proof about what it is. So I haven't got proof about where the cookie went, and say that at the moment there's no way to prove it. What you can do, though, is take all you can speculate, take the possibilities that you can think of and rank them. And I think the question I'm getting at is, how do we rank the possibilities in terms of likelihood when we are admitting that we don't know for sure, and we don't know yet, and maybe we'll never know, but we can still rank them in terms of, okay, what out of the things we can possibly speculate, how do we rank those things? That's where I see a problem in terms of sometimes that, for example, I saw there's a video about the I don't remember which incident it was. It was one of the Navy UFO incidents that was being studied by the US government, and this video was criticizing how the Navy has interpreted it, and saying, the people in the Navy have come out and said, I think it's most likely, it would seem, it's non-human technology. That seems to be one of the more, not that it's proven, but that's one of the more likely things. And the response from one video was, what you're saying is it's extraordinary until proven otherwise. And my issue with that is, what makes it extraordinary? I see, like, it's not supernatural. If it is, then we're supernatural for existing and having technology. You know, like, it's not.
I think you're losing the baby with the bathwater on that, Ray. You're losing the point if you make that concession. So if somebody says there's non-human technology that's responsible for something, then I think before it gets on the table, you need to show that there's non-human technology. Otherwise, so here's my piece on this is I truly think that the unanswered questions are the ones that we as humans strive to investigate. And if we put something on the cork board of humanity saying, what the fuck is this? Then hopefully we can inspire somebody to do the work to try and figure it out. And it's kind of, it makes me think of like a dark matter, right? I think the best thing science has done for dark matter is say, we have no fucking idea what it is. Because there are a lot of people who cannot stand that and are working as hard as they can to try and figure it out. But what they didn't do is they didn't put a placeholder in there until then, right? Dark matter is a misnomer, and anytime you look into it, they say, well, actually, you know, it's a misnomer. But they didn't say that is an alien ship, you know, or it could be an alien ship.
That's the thing. I'm not saying is, I'm saying how do we rank it and say how likely it is? I think the best way to do it is look at all the other possibilities you've thought of. Think of all the possibilities you've thought of. Be aware that there might be something you haven't thought of. So there could always be an explanation you've just not even thought of and can't even conceive of yet.
Sure.
And then apart from that, a couple of things you can think of and rank those. For now, that's the best you can do until you prove something.
Sure.
So the way I would rank those things that we have thought of, which includes non-human technology, for example, or whatever other example we can think of, I would rank them by saying out of these reasons, which one does not have logical reasons that seem to be really against it? So, for example, the idea that it's Russia, that is ridiculous to me because there's so many reasons against it being possible that in 2004 Russia could do that.
But
now they're somehow something to win a war against Ukraine.
Right.
That makes no sense.
Right. There's a big difference between Russia and non-human technology, though.
I think, though, can I jump in here real fast? Let me jump in.
It does not make sense to be Russia. There are reasons against it being Russia. There are no scientific or logical reasons against it being non-human technology.
That's my
reasons.
Ray, I've got you. I think that was where I was going to go as well. In this hypothetical ranking, where do we place things that have active evidence against versus no evidence either direction?
Sure. So if you're going to list them, right, you can go, here are all the possibilities I can think of. And then you put the box that says something I haven't thought of.
Right.
And if you get rid of all of the stuff that you can think of and you're left with something I haven't thought of, then you say...
No, I'm not saying something you haven't thought of. You're saying that Russia creating this UFO thing is more likely than non-human technology.
No, I'm saying non-human technology doesn't get to go on the table that way. It goes on the table in the same way that unicorns and fairies go on the table. You can say, we don't know.
I'm going to push back on you.
Why?
I don't think that that's accurate because that's not following the scientific method.
Really? So what part of the scientific method says if you don't know the answer, then you can come up with one? No.
You're assuming that the response to non-human technology is, therefore, that's what it must be. That's not what I don't think Ray is saying, certainly not what I'm saying. I'm saying we thought that lightning was divine at one point. And if we're like, well, lightning is just one of those supernatural things, we're not even going to bother hypothesizing about that. We're focusing on the stuff we know about. We would never figure out how lightning worked.
Sure.
So what I'm saying is I feel like the direction that Ray is going in, and Ray, you can jump in a minute and let me know if I'm accurate here, is we need to consider that maybe lightning is something that we don't know, but maybe not supernatural, before we can figure out that lightning is, in fact, a natural phenomenon. And I think you would agree with that, but I think you are assuming the next step, which is someone assuming that, well, lightning is possibly supernatural, therefore that's what it is, therefore I'm not going to look into it any further. And I think that that's not quite what is being on the table here.
I think that you're making an assumption about my statement as well, but I want to give Ray the chance to retort. Ray, did V summarize what you were trying to say?
Yeah, that's how I'm thinking of it. Is I'm not saying that we should. I feel like part of the problem is that when someone proposes a possibility that someone else sees as, for whatever reason, they feel like it would be weird, they call it supernatural or extraordinary, and then assume that you are claiming that's definitely the answer, and that's not the case. I'm just literally working out, how do we rank when we're thinking of the things we can conceive of as an explanation for something? What is the best way to rank them? And I feel like a lot of the reason that, say, like the people who used to doubt evolution when it was first proposed thought they were being skeptical because the idea at first, out of context of all the other evidence, when you just first heard it for the first time, it would have sounded extraordinary. It would have sounded almost like magic.
Absolutely.
And
So
you would have called it. It would have felt like some kind of mystical.
Got it. I think you might be conflating what I'm saying with the idea that I'm trying to stifle investigation. And the fact is, if that's what I've communicated, then I need to try and communicate better, because what I'm trying to say is, I think that you are going to empower investigation when you leave it as, I don't know. Instead, I think that the implication there that, well, let's just not investigate it because it doesn't fit within our paradigm. I'm coming at it the other way of, let's not investigate it because it must be supernatural. We're talking past each other, I think. And the point I'm trying to say is, if we're listing possibilities for the cause of a thing, then if we want something to go in the list of possibilities, then it needs to leave the I don't know box. And I highly encourage everyone to look into the I don't know box, find something you want to investigate and investigate it. But until we can get to know something in the I don't know box doesn't get to be part of the list of possible solutions. I feel like we're better going to be able to filter out.
I get that ghosts and vampires and fairies with magic wands, I get those, but I don't get why people put non-human intelligence in that box. Like those, I don't see how, apart from conditioning, social conditioning, being taught that these all belong in the same category, when really, if they belong in that category, then so do we. We're a species that evolved on a planet and have technology and have now left that planet. Without why is that spooky? Are we spooky and weird and supernatural?
No.
So then non-human intelligence shouldn't be either. It's just another species like us.
Absolutely.
Biology,
Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. So what evidence, I agree with you. I think the universe is way too big for us to be alone. I really do.
And too old.
Now, now that said, the incredibly unlikely chance that an alien race, right, a non-human race, somehow made it to Earth and their technology is here, it is insanely unlikely. And because of that, I would have to say, hey, I'm not going to use that as a list of a possible cause for a thing until we can, investigate that further, right? It's not a supernatural claim. It's an extraordinary claim. It didn't spook me out that I couldn't understand what the unidentified flying object is. And I'm not trying to dismiss it that it didn't happen. What I'm trying to say is point at that, say, I don't know, and stop trying to come up with, fantastical solutions when the question, the statement, I don't know, can empower somebody, can encourage somebody to investigate. I really don't think that, the example you gave, yeah, you're right. It's not supernatural, but it is extraordinary.
And we'll come back to the...
No, I have to go back another time to talk about that then, because honestly, that's where I disagree. I don't think extraterrestrial life or other it doesn't have to be extraterrestrial.
I didn't say that, Ray. Ray, I didn't say that.
Extraordinary.
I didn't say that.
I think we're going to wrap up this call. It's gone on a little bit long.
It has.
Ray, thank you for calling in. And I like that, you got the three of us kind of all having our own thoughts about this and probably disagreeing on a bunch of stuff. We're gonna keep talking about this for sure. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you.
Was I saying that?
The way that it sounded to me was that, given a situation, I think there was a problem conflating extraordinary and supernatural. I think that I agree with both of you, because I think I see where both of you were coming from, and you were both making an uncharitable claim assumption about the other person's opinion. So I think Ray was assuming that you were saying it shouldn't even be considered as a possibility, and we should never look into it, and we should just dismiss it outright. And I think you were assuming that Ray was suggesting that it held as much weight as other things and should be considered a viable option. And I don't think that either of those was actually an argument being made here. I think that the argument was, hey, if something seems extraordinary, we should not just throw it out. We should focus on it and see if we can come up with extraordinary evidence, because it would be really cool if we found proof of something extraordinary.
Sure.
I think that was literally like, that's what I got out of this conversation.
I don't know. I just kind of want to put a pin on it that I don't think that there being, extraterrestrial life at some point somewhere, like, I think that's more likely than not. I'm not saying that is the extraordinary claim, because I'll agree with you. I think that is not extraordinary. The extraordinary piece is us interacting with it. That's the extraordinary piece. When we point a telescope to a planet that is 1 million light years away, we're seeing a planet 1 million light years ago. And if life would have sprung up and possibly extinguished itself before but from the time that we saw it to getting there, then what are the odds of us being able to communicate with them?
Right. So it's the same thing where, because of the time distortion that happens during viewing things light years away, hypothetically, what happens is an extraterrestrial species will look down and see all of us riding on horseback with powdered wigs and be like, oh, well, they're not nearly as sophisticated yet.
Right.
So, there are actual physical reasons why certain assumptions about that are absolutely false, which again, I think Ray was saying when they mentioned it couldn't be Russia, because there is actual physical evidence against that. So that needs to be wrapped into it for sure.
I don't think so. I don't think that the claim of whether or not Russia did it impacts the claim of whether or not aliens
I'm not
did
saying it impacts it. I'm saying it's synonymous. You can have a claim about something that is physical, that could be the case, but has a lot of evidence against it physically. And I think the question Ray was asking was, would a physical claim that had physical evidence against it be higher or lower on the list of things, possible options, than something that we could not prove or disprove with physical evidence?
I think that opens the door to every I think that does more harm than good.
Okay.
But where are we going? That is going to be a hell of a long clip, but I'm totally okay with it.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of people who've called in. So who are we talking to next?
Let's talk to John. John is a theist from Louisiana who called last week and didn't get a chance to chat because I think we wanted to dive into this a little bit more.
Yes.
John, you want to talk about separation of church and state, and we would love to hear your thoughts on this. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm a believer, and but here recently, I somehow or another got tied in with a group of atheists, and on Sunday morning, I hang out with these guys, and it seems to me like the only real gap between us is if we had a strict separation of church and state, we could probably get along pretty good, because otherwise we're just people talking.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that if you are hanging out with a group of atheists and their problems are not the fact that you're a believer, but rather the fact that a particular religion is infringing on their rights, and we got rid of that problem, yeah, you guys would be probably a lot easier to just, everybody would be able to get along a lot better.
Oh, absolutely. John, there are so many Christians that I get along with better than other atheists, because just because we have, different answers on the God claim doesn't mean that we have the same answers on, how to treat other humans. So if you and I are humanists, if we care about the well-being and the growth of other people around us, we're going to get together, we're going to be a whole lot better friends than maybe another atheist who is not a humanist, So yeah, absolutely.
Well, which brings me to my other question or other concern is with the people that that claim to worship the Constitution so much in this country, why are they having such a difficult time with the separation of church and state? I understand that a lot of it is just tradition. They're afraid. They're thinking they might lose something. But if they truly believe in the Constitution, then why aren't we moving towards or back to that separation of church and state?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things baked into that, and I could go into detail, but I don't want to.
I'm very curious to hear what you're going to say on this.
Okay. I think that we give it way, way too much power. When we look at the Constitution, we need to realize that this was a document written by people who, as a Christian, you understand people are fallible. And those people lived in a certain time. And so we can expect that the Constitution of the United States is going to reflect the people and the time that it was written in. And so when we say get back to it, I don't want to get back to the United States when it was first founded. That United States had a very limited number of people who could vote and a large number of people who didn't have human rights. And so recognizing that first, I think, is really important. There are so many people. I was watching the investigation around January 6th that's been going on. And there was a representative from Arizona who, with tears in his eyes, was saying that he believes that the Constitution of the United States was God-breathed. I mean, I'm not even a Christian, and I think that's heretical. But the fact is, there are a lot of people who think that it is not just, the best, but that it is ineffable, that it is handed down divinely. And I think when you get to that, we're no longer able to talk to each other. So when you say get back to the Constitution, I don't think that should be our goal.
That's a good point. And you guys frequently mention that there are all sorts of atheists. That when you call someone an atheist, that's just another label. But I would say that the same thing is maybe even more true of Christians.
Oh,
that
yeah.
is, if you stood outside a church on any given Sunday morning and you had a list of questions, you would find such a wide variety of answers. But yet at the same time, Christians, because of that comfort zone, will still cling together with some major differences of opinion.
Oh, yeah.
But yet if an atheist or an agnostic stepped in and with those same questions or concerns would be labeled, here's a heretic, we need to, excise them from our society.
Yeah.
And I just don't think it's fair. I mean, I guess it sounds really weird that a Christian would have these feelings.
No,
but
not at all.
The more I hang out with these guys, the more I really sympathize and empathize with the position and the place of atheists and agnostics in our society, that they're really, if anyone is being persecuted, it's not the Christians. The myth of Christian persecution just seems to live on and grow for whatever reason.
Well, to be clear, maybe there is a myth of Christian persecution in the United States. Mm-hmm. If we go outside of the United States, you would probably agree with me that there are some countries where there is Christian persecution. In the same way that I wouldn't say that there's Muslim persecution necessarily in Muslim countries, but there definitely is here. Sorry, being persecuted by the state.
I would push back on that, but I know what you're saying.
And actually, the thing you're going to push back on is something that I want to ask John. Mm-hmm. John, when I was a Christian, first of all, I just want to say you sound like an absolute sweetheart.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you called in.
I think.
Here's kind of what killed me when I was still, considering myself a Christian and figuring myself out. What killed me is there were people in my church who would say, no, John, you're wrong. Because those people who disagree with me, well, they just aren't true Christians, John. Have you heard that? Have you considered or talked to people who've had that mindset? And what do you think about that?
I've heard it. I've heard it, and there's so much hypocrisy in that, because some of the same people that tell me well, they were never true Christians, are the very ones that want to say, oh, brother, don't you have the assurance of salvation? And I'm like, what does that mean? Oh, but if you die, you know you're going to go to heaven. But yet they'll turn around if someone has a different opinion and say, oh, they were never really saved after all. And I'm like, man, you guys are trying to have it both ways.
Absolutely.
Spot on.
But I'm for some reason I'm taking the Christian apologist route because I just kind of want to push a little bit more. John, so have you heard of the argument from Hypocrisy?
No.
No? Easiest example I can have. My dad was a lifelong smoker, right? Smoked cigarettes every day. And when I turned 18, I started smoking cigarettes. And he looks at me and he's got disappointment in his eyes and he says, son, those are going to kill you someday. And I looked at him and I thought, because I wasn't going to talk back, but I thought, you goddamn hypocrite. The problem is him being a hypocrite doesn't make him wrong. It just makes him a hypocrite. And so if somebody is being a hypocrite, it doesn't mean they're wrong. So when you point out the hypocrisy, I absolutely agree. But how can you tell whether or not someone is a true Christian? You know what I mean? I think the example you gave is a really, really good point. But we need a little bit more to investigate. Like there's still some more meat on the bone. Even if they're hypocrites, are they wrong? And if they are, why? Because being a hypocrite isn't a good enough reason for them to be wrong.
Well, I can give you an example from my own life because I had a Southern Baptist pastor friend of mine. We were friends for 25 years up until the time Donald Trump was elected, and you can kind of fill in the blanks on that. But this was one of the people that would say, oh, brother, don't you have the assurance of salvation? And I asked him one day, I said, if we sat down, and whether it takes 10 minutes, 10 hours, or 10 days, you can ask me any question about my life. There's no question that I wouldn't answer truthfully. And after you ask all the questions you want, then will you tell me whether or not I'm going to heaven? And he said, oh, no, brother, I couldn't tell you that. Only God knows that. And I said, then what's the point of you having your job? And he said, oh, it's to preach the gospel. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah. There is a fundamental problem between the argument that the people who are Christians are true Christians who will continue to be saved and go to heaven, and the concept of evangelism at all. And that is one of the core problems with a lot of U.S. Christianity, because they've adopted the Calvinistic viewpoint of a true believer versus somebody who was destined to fall away or wasn't ever really true Christian or whatever. And the Protestant, like, fundamentalist evangelical side of things, which focuses on, well, save as many people as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And when you bring those two together, unless you do exactly what you did, John, and sit someone down and actually make them walk this out with you, there's no winning that argument, because they're going to pick one or the other side, whichever side is going to win them their case. So it is hypocrisy, but it also is illogical, which is where the problem comes in. John, this has been a really good call. I think I just want to say, listen, the reason that church and state separation is an issue right now is, I mean, we could go through, like, oh, well, back during the Red Scare, like, one of the ways that you were able to convince people to turn on their neighbors as communists was to equate communism with atheism and equate the U.S. with Christianity, and that baked in a really intense divide that was inherently political. So all of a sudden now Christians and atheists are not just different in their beliefs, but different in their politics and their economics and the way that they would want to run the world. And so I think, this is just me hypothesizing as somebody who has done a little bit of research into this, that split really kind of was that first enormous crack in that church-state separation in the minds of the average American. There have always been people who have, like, wanted to get over that wall and take advantage of one or both sides. But in the psyche of the average person, especially older generations who were actually there and like experiencing that propaganda, it's very easy to convince people that Christians need to be in control of the government or else you get communism. And communism is bad because it's tied to atheism, which is bad. So it becomes this like circle of bad logic and associations that a lot of people just kind of adopt as true because it feels right because they've heard it so much and that's the culture they grew up in.
I don't know. I feel like there's a backstop to that, V. Because I think that if we were to look back at founding fathers, it would be more similar to some radical libertarians who, if you're lucky enough, if you're privileged enough to be self-sustaining, and you just make the assumption that everybody else is as self-sustaining as you, then advocating for that kind of libertarian ideology, I feel like there was not a separation of church and state per se like that. At least it wasn't actively on the minds of founding fathers. I think that it was a humanist perspective with a lot of years in between that established the separation of church and state. In the same way that we add amendments to the United States, right? We add different
No, Thomas Jefferson was the one who used that term.
Coined church and state. You're right, in the Federalist Papers.
Right, because
Never
people
mind.
were actively...
Forget everything that I just said, you guys. I'm absolutely wrong. I don't know where I was wrong. You can let me know in the comments. John, don't listen to me. I'm not having a good day. I'm just an asshole on the internet.
No, there were states that were beginning to enact state religions and choosing a faction of Christianity and persecuting other people in those states that were not that particular flavor of Christian. And that was starting to replicate what people initially left Europe for.
Totally wrong. Totally wrong.
Yeah.
I was trying to make a point that, we're getting better and our morals are getting better than the founding fathers. I just used a really, really bad one and made a wrong example. John, thank you for calling in.
Yes, please.
I enjoyed talking to you.
Man, like seriously, before you go, the reason ideologically why people need that separation is because as soon as they do what you do, and decide to go and see what the other people are talking about, and are they really that bad? You start to realize, wait, they're not that bad. Like, oh, maybe we don't have irreconcilable differences at our cores. We're just going about it differently, and maybe they have some good ideas. And the second you get into that headspace, you are no longer controllable in the same way. John, you have liberated yourself, and the fact that you're calling in and talking about this is really cool and is going to help other people. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely.
And you guys have a good afternoon.
You too.
Yeah, whether or not John ever stops becoming a Christian, even as a Christian, it just makes you a better person. And I know that you had that like deep, ooh, there's a problem with the Muslim example, but because they don't think that they're true Muslims, because they're not doing it right, you get that kind of persecution. I did want to lean into that, but I totally see the point, and if that was not your point, I want to give you the chance to respond.
No, that was definitely like Shia versus Sunni kind of.
Oh yeah,
conflict.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay.
If we had more time, I would have asked. The point that I wanted to make there, and I was taking way too long doing it, is that when someone is self-identifying, gatekeeping is not going to help very much. It's just not. If somebody identifies themselves as a Christian, then okay, you're a Christian. You're not maybe a Christian that I'm used to seeing, but when your response to somebody self-identifying as gatekeeping, you're not actually having a conversation. You're just trying to invalidate them before the conversation can begin. And it's uncomfortable. There are a lot of people who call themselves atheists that I remember when I first really started on this, I'm like, oh, they're not real atheists. Oh, fuck. I guess they are. And there are problems that we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I feel like that goes to the core of, at this show, our tagline, we need to talk, is an understanding that there's a lot more work to do. And application of skepticism just, yeah. Anyway. Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi. How was that walk around the block for you? Refreshing?
Felt good. I think I chewed a little too much scenery on that one, but I'm all right.
Let's talk to Ameet in New York.
Okay.
Ameet, welcome to the show. You have a question about evaluating information from groups with biases?
Yeah. Hi, V. Hi, Eric.
Hi, how have you been?
I have been good. Busy, but good.
Good.
I had a question for the two of you. I know, Eric, you mentioned at the beginning of the show, hey, you need to be skeptical. You need to think, hey, maybe there's not that secret group out there that's trying to take away your rights kind of things, right? Mm-hmm. And immediately that made me go back to a quote-unquote documentary that I was watching a while ago called The Family.
Yes, I've seen it.
Group.
Yes.
You've seen it,
I
right?
have,
Yeah.
I have.
Right, and because, I happen to agree with you and with the two of you and with a lot of people on one side of the political spectrum and one side of the belief spectrum. And when I listened to the documentary, I found myself going, yeah, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But, that's probably not the most skeptical way to go about it in my head.
Yeah.
So my question is, there also a secret cabal somewhere out there, making decisions and influencing policy. How do I evaluate the things on my side of the fence the same way that I do things on the other side of the fence? I find myself falling for confirmation bias.
Oh man,
yeah.
and the documentaries they put out are so good at bypassing a lot of those first red flags. I was watching this UFO documentary on, I think it was Hulu or HBO or something the other year, and I was finding myself going well, they put a document on screen and it looks like an official document. I can't read it, but it looks legit. And then they started going into and Burl Ives was in on it, and that's why the Marilyn Monroe was murdered, was because she knew about Area 51. And I was just oh, I'm in too deep. I need to get out. It was bad.
Wow.
Yeah.
I do have thoughts
Go
here.
for it.
I would love to just jump in real fast. So, the difference, the Family documentary, I believe it's on Netflix, is is different than your typical, late night History Channel UFO thing. It does have some backing. I think the key here, Ameet, because it really is difficult to have this conversation without acknowledging that there is currently a group of very aggressive, conspiracy-minded people actively trying to take over things, right? And to do what people claim that aliens are trying to do or the lizard people are trying to do.
And rewrite history to evidence it.
Exactly. So that is happening. The conspiracy theory angle is, and it's all a secret and no one knows but me. If you were to watch the Family documentary as somebody who grew up in a very similar worldview like I did, it wasn't secret, right? Nobody in to those of you who don't know what the Family is, I realize that we're going on this thing assuming you know.
We're going to have to watch it this evening.
Essentially, it's the claim that this person made who was inducted into a Jesus cult, essentially, as a teenager. Very pretty standard at first, abstinence, boy, the broy, brothers in Christ,
okay.
live on a house in some politician's backyard or whatever. And essentially what those groups were trying to do, he wasn't the only group, they were trying to groom people to actively infiltrate the government from the ground up and eventually take it over and make it into a Christian nation. And it was talking about how certain people already were in place in this organization and how they were funneling money to other countries to fund Christian takeovers there. And I'm not saying it's all accurate. I have no way of knowing that. But I do want to push back on the idea that it was a secret ever, because if you were anywhere where those people were, they were actively talking about doing that. And no one took them seriously. In the same way that right now we're seeing people talk very blatantly about like anti-trans stuff, or, you know, moving into this really scary cleansing mentality around trans people. They're not being quiet about it. They just aren't being taken seriously yet. And so if in 20 years somebody made a documentary about this secret, quote unquote, cabal of anti-trans people who were trying to eliminate trans people from the United States, to a lot of people who weren't aware that it's currently happening now, it would feel very much like a conspiracy theory. But the fact is, there is a difference between saying, it's all a secret because there are top secret people who are working in the underground and no one knows but me. And, oh no, they are talking about this. It's just no one is taking them seriously or listening and actually understanding what they're advocating for. And so that would be the key difference for me. But I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
So, I mean, to be fair, I didn't grow up in that sort of an environment, so I was not hearing this outright, right? So I'm hearing this from a third-party perspective, and when I hear these claims, I think, oh, okay, well, I hear the claims, and I instantly start thinking, well, aren't the other side of the political spectrum also saying the same thing? Aren't they using certain groups of people and saying, well, they're out in the open and that this is their agenda and stuff like that? And I just happen to agree with one side. How do I vet the sources in this while coming from a third party perspective, you know?
Ooh, so V has some specialized training in this. The only thing that I would add before you kind of impart that particular wisdom is, Ameet, it has a lot to do with recognizing you're not going to get rid of your own bias. You're not. You are just as human as anybody else, and the fact that you have bias doesn't make you bad. Recognizing that you are biased and making sure that you are harder on things that you agree with will help. It is keeping a watchful eye, especially when something sounds like it fits into your worldview way too easily. And it is a paranoid, rough way to live your life. And it is so freaking rewarding because you don't fall into those traps. And that's a general bit of advice that I would give to anybody there, that, hey, guess what? If you're human, you have a bias. Recognize your bias and be especially hard on those things. But V's got probably a lot more, direct stuff.
Well, I mean, I've definitely done a couple of videos on how to vet sources, so I'm not going to go over all of that. But what I would say, Ameet, is we need to make sure that we're not missing... Like the goal is never to say this thing could never happen and everything in that category is categorically conspiracy because that could never happen, right? So we are now in a place where we can say, okay, 3 different people are saying that the government is being taken over. Person A says it's being taken over by Christians. Person B says it's getting taken over by liberal communists. And person C says it's being taken over by aliens. Right? So the argument there could be, for some people, oh, well, the government being taken over is a conspiracy theory, so all of them are wrong. And that gets rid of the alien person for sure. But what it doesn't do is get ready for if there ever is a government takeover, or like actively evaluate the evidence that is being brought to the table. So I don't think that the problem is the action of a government takeover. That is not the conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories then try to explain it in a very particular way. So the only person of those 3 who I would call a conspiracy theorist is the person who believes in aliens, because no matter how much you sit down with them and talk through it, they're only ever going to provide you with, oh, well, I heard this source from somewhere, or, oh, look at this blurry photo that was better explained by something else, or the quality of their evidence and the leaps that they are making from piece of evidence to piece of evidence is where that conspiracy theorist mindset comes into play, right? The quality of their evidence for this claim is bad, just objectively. The other two might have actual evidence. And then it becomes a question of, okay, who is making assumptions about whether or not that is good or bad and why, right? So the person who says, well, liberal communists are taking over, granted, liberal communist is a misnomer and can't exist. But the idea that, okay, so you're seeing active legislation being passed to increase gender equality, increase right to reproductive rights and equal pay and all of these things that you classify as liberal communist, right? And so, yes, that is actively happening. And we are also seeing people pushing back on that and saying, no, we're actually going to start banning people from using pronouns in school for some reason, or we're going to advocate for book burnings. And so both of those things are happening. Now it just becomes a question of, okay, so government takeover is a big word for that. It's dramatic. So are, all Christians. That's not accurate. And so inaccurate is liberal communists. But what we can acknowledge is that both of those people have a point of view and have evidence to back that up. And now we have to decide, do we agree with either of these people? Right? And then it no longer is in the realm of conspiracy theory. It becomes a conversation about, should government takeovers be good or bad? Like, is that always a bad thing? Is it always a good thing? Should there be government? Which is another conversation entirely. If somebody were to take over the government, what would that person have to bring to the table for me to see it as a good thing? And what things are red flags to me? And so then we have the conversations around, we should be pushing for even more, quote unquote, liberal communist agendas, or, oh no, we need to crack down even harder and become even more godly as a result. So the argument I'm making here, and it's a very roundabout way of doing it, the government takeover aspect, the action itself, unless it inherently entails a supernatural element, is not the conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory component comes from the leaps you make and the kind of evidence that you bring to the table. After that, we have to contend with the very real possibility that things do happen that are huge and terrifying and coordinated. And then we have to decide which side has evidence and what evidence do we agree with, and how are we weighing that morally? But those are two very different conversations to have, is my point. Does that make any sense?
No, that helps a lot.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eric, for also offering your insight. I obviously I'm not the best skeptic. I'm just trying to be better.
Same here. We didn't go to college for this. We are two assholes on the internet with a YouTube show. Like, take everything we say with a grain of salt. But the fact that you're trying, the fact you're working on it is wonderful.
And the fact that you were able to identify where a red flag was popping up and being like, oh wait, this documentary with its like intense music and like shadowy figures and like weird camera angles, that is going to evoke a response from you. That's the goal. So in general, if you ever come across something that seems to be relying more on the emotional piece than the actually like factual piece, that doesn't mean that it's wrong automatically, right? There could very well be an emotional component that, is packaging this true thing. But the best thing to do is exactly what you did, which is realize that that's happening and then step away and be like, okay, how would I prove that this were true if this thing was actually happening and I wasn't being influenced by the emotional piece of it?
Okay.
So yeah, keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Really appreciate your input.
Absolutely.
And thank you for having this conversation every week. But
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for calling in, Ameet.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, you went on a sprint.
I did. I'm curious. I'm going to look back at that and see if I agree with it later. I feel like that made sense, but
I did a whole thing in the call prior, which I'm already embarrassed about.
Oh my gosh.
So we might need to lick our wounds later. But being honest and saying, hey, we're trying. That's the best we can do.
Yeah, we've got time for one more call. Let's go with Micaiah in Texas.
Okay.
Micaiah, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you.
You want to talk a little bit about labels and tools to understand one's identity?
Yeah, just mainly about identity. You guys touched on a lot of things today that can be included in what I wanted to talk about, which is great. I did have one thing real quick. So last time I did call in before, we talked about virtue, about if redemption was a virtue.
Yeah. Yes, I remember.
And I called on my cell phone. This time I'm on the tiny.cc, and I've been noticing throughout the call, I've been hearing some skipping or clicking. So I don't know if it has something to do with that, but I just wanted
might
to
be
bring
Colin
that to your
Studio.
attention.
It could be Colin Studio. That would make sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is a place
Yeah,
I didn't
so-
even think about investigating.
Just real quick, wanted to get that
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
for you guys. Yeah. And then, but anyways, so yeah, identity. I wanted to talk about how people identify as either like a certain thing or multiple things sometimes, right? And
Yeah.
what that means, right? I wanted to talk about skepticism as a tool compared to having it as an identity. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, if somebody says that they are a skeptic and that's where they end it, odds are I don't think they've thought about it very hard.
Right.
Skeptic is a tool in the toolbox that gets you to,
Yeah.
I don't know, I should probably look at this more.
Yeah.
If you're only a skeptic, I don't know how you get out of bed in the morning. That said, when I do say I'm a skeptic and when I list out things that I, put in my own identity, what I'm trying to communicate is that I do question the world around me, and I'm not satisfied with a dogmatic response, with a dogmatic answer to things.
Yeah.
And I think that's important when I'm describing myself, because I think that says a lot about how I approach the world around me. So I still think it's useful to my identity when I call myself a skeptic, but I'm also making sure that I have a well-rounded understanding of myself, and I don't just limit it to skeptic in quotes. I think it requires more work. V, what do you think?
Yeah, I love this question because for me, it has value in both areas. So if you use skepticism as a tool, which you should, then yes, you are by definition skeptical, but not everybody who is skeptical uses the term skeptic, right? And so what is the difference between somebody who uses skepticism in their day-to-day life but doesn't use that word to describe themselves versus someone who uses that tool and does call themselves a skeptic as a piece of who they are? They have adopted that label. And I think that there isn't one right way to do that, right? There are people who are non-binary because they are actively resisting the gender paradigm, right? And then there are people who are non-binary because they feel like that word fits how they experience the world. And there are people who do both. And all of those things are non-binary. It's just how you use that word. And for skeptics specifically, I think that it can be useful in that the way that we have decided to adopt that label allows us to find community better, especially on an internet that is word-based, right? So like we could, if the internet, you could only find other people by searching for symbols or like artwork, we would all have to adopt a piece of artwork and be like, anybody who has this art on their page is this thing. And you can search by that, right? We search by words. We search by skeptic. And that word triggers something in us. Oh, that person might agree with me on certain things. So let me talk with them. Let me allow their input into my life. The danger is that, and we were talking about this the other day, once you have allowed someone into your community, into your circle, a lot of the barriers that filter out bad information go down. And so what could happen is you could see other people who identify as skeptics and take that to mean that they agree with you on many things when they actually don't, or take that to mean that they are a safe person when they're actually not. And so
We're calling you out, intellectual dark web. We're calling you out.
It doesn't even, it doesn't need to be said that we call out the intellectual dark web. But yeah, I think that the value is that it allows you to find community in the same way that any other label does. And the harm is the same as any other label as well, which is the assumption that we make as social creatures who are not in the majority and are not treated as normal to gravitate towards people like us for safety and for support and for growth.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time there are people there willing to meet us and willing to help us and show us new things. But some of the time people use that term either maliciously or just because they like it in a way that will harm you. So use it as a tool to investigate the label, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I say something?
Absolutely, go for it.
Okay. Yeah. So like the first thought that comes to my mind when I think of skeptic is that it's essentially the first process of the scientific method, right? You start from a place of I don't know, which is making as little assumptions as possible, right? That being said, you can only get so far without making some assumptions in some ways. Otherwise, you don't have change that way, right? But you have to be careful about that. So that's what comes to my mind. And I wanted to say that you can probably see on the thing that when someone asks me what I identify as, I don't say skeptic, I say agnostic atheist, right? And I think there's something to be said about that, even though I do agree with skepticism and the idea and the importance that it plays, right?
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that you are making a very informed decision as to what labels you take on and how you form your identity around them. And I think that that's very valuable and everyone should do that. What you introduce yourself as, what you call yourself, will impact how other people treat you. And if you want to broaden the number of people that will be comfortable around you, the best course of action a lot of the time is to adopt labels that are not triggering to people, right?
Yeah.
And so that is one way to do that. And if that's your goal, you're making it work. That is an accurate approach to take. And it really just becomes, hey, what does Micaiah want out of this interaction?
Yeah.
Do you want to challenge the other person? Maybe use atheist. Do you want to, find commonality? Maybe use agnostic.
And if you want to build a bubble around yourself and not be challenged on anything, then use a whole bunch of identifiers so that you can get this really tight niche that agrees with you.
You're right. Yeah. I can see problems with that one.
Honestly, I think it's a problem that I've had that I'm working back from. Yeah. That when I use too many qualifiers for myself, I'm pigeonholing myself in a niche and I'm not able to express myself fully as a person. I have over-identified myself. I've over-labeled myself. And yet the first thing that I said was an argument. Anyway, somebody in the live chat was just like, are we shaming skeptics on this show? Is that what we're doing?
Some skeptics when they deserve it.
Yeah,
or if they ask for it,
I
because
hope not.
kink is cool.
Yeah, it's more that I think that we should go further. We should explore ourselves more. But there's a balancing act there that I have not figured out yet. I'm still working on it.
I think we do ourselves a disservice when we pick one label and identify as that, and it can create stagnation, and I think that's what we can see in some groups sometimes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think if we pick too many labels, yes. But we do need a couple. That goes into the whole identity politics thing. Like, I think I have learned that when I tried to use atheist as a label, I was lumped in with a whole lot of people I fucking hate. And so it took me time to realize that I had to be a little more specific than that.
Yeah. Well, this brought up another thing that I had thought about.
Yeah.
So, like, when I was young, growing up, when I was starting to understand that, evangelicalism was bunk for me, I was exploring. I was looking into Wicca first for a good long time, and when I was studying it, what I found was that people will identify as something like a witch or Wiccan, usually one or the other, sometimes both. But at the same time, it has this assumed identity of pagan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to think about labels and where they're derived, where they come from, and how that affects how you decide about these things.
Oh,
That
absolutely.
is an argument V and I have had for a long time.
Yeah, there's a reason why I call myself an atheist witch, and it's exactly because people assume a lot of things when you just say witch or just say atheist. It's an interesting combination that makes people go, wait, what?
And for a very long time, I pushed back on V, saying there are a lot of implications that come with witch that you are now providing, support for if you're not super specific every time you say it. And it has been it's been an ongoing conversation that we've had that is exactly.
Also,
a
let's
microcosm
just
of
be
that.
honest as well. The like current, very American Wicca scene is just as bad as any other religion when it comes to like, oh, you're this kind, but are you that kind? Like, you can't do that if you're this, and like the labels just follow you. Like, it's a part of human like instinct to put things into boxes.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, as many different denominations of Christian there are are equally as many, if not more, different types of belief. And when it just comes to paganism or Wiccanism or whatever, like every individual person has their own thought and belief, right? So it's not just these different groups. So I think that's an important thing to be reminded of sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for calling in, Micaiah. I loved this question, and I think it's a good note to end on.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks
Micaiah.
for taking my call.
Absolutely.
We had a caller who wanted to talk about monogamy and polyamory, and I feel like that's a great conversation that we could have on another week. That because I feel like we set this episode to be about what is a skeptic, and I feel like that'd be an interesting one that I'd love to
skeptical of monogamy,
right?
I mean,
How does
you have reason for it.
For our caller on the line, thank you for waiting. Sorry we don't have time, but call in again. We'd love to have that conversation.
I do like the comrade as the pronouns.
Yeah.
I'm glad that comrade called in. I hope comrade calls back again next week.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
All right. Well, we talked about what skeptics were this week, which is awesome. Normally, we don't actually get to set a theme and then have people follow through with it. We'll go off in different directions, which is fun. But like, this was actually kind of awesome to have an ongoing conversation about all the different elements that skepticism kind of brings up for people.
Absolutely. Not just by the day, but the fact that it's you and I coming on every single week, being able to have ongoing conversations, I think is what helps set Skepgen apart. And I'm very, very proud of that. We've got a couple of super chats that have come in. Do you want to hop in?
Sure thing. RJ sent the weekly banana, $1.99 Australian. Thank you so much, RJ.
Thank you, RJ. John Klein sent $10. Thank you. Says, V, thanks for taking time out of your show to acknowledge the life of my beautiful Calvin. You both rock. Love ya.
Hey, we respect cats on this show.
Absolutely.
Holly K sent $10. Thank you, Holly, and says, just showing y'all some support.
We sincerely appreciate that. That is, it really, really does help. So thank you. Billy G sent $10 and says, I admire and respect both of you for your willingness to have honest and respectful conversation. We
Thanks,
try.
Billy. That's the goal. And then Sarah Dye also sent $10. Thank you, Sarah, and says, thank you for another great show.
We're happy to. We're happy to. This was a lot of fun.
This was a good, feel-good episode.
I think I'm not done yet, though. I want to talk a little bit more, and I think we should move that to the Discord. What do you think?
I think that we should argue in Discord in front of people.
Ooh.
Consensually.
Okay.
All right, guys. We will see you on the Discord if you want to join us for an after show. That link is in the description, so you can go find us there. But in the meantime, we're glad we had this talk.